Hello, and welcome back to the third episode of the SJUK Leaders in Security podcast. I'm your host, James Humphreys, editor of Security Journal UK, and today we're talking about operational resilience, what it means, why it's critical for companies today, and how businesses can integrate resiliency into their core strategies. Joining me is Tracy Reinhold, Global CSO at Everbridge, a company at the forefront of helping organisations navigate complex risks and build resiliency. Welcome, Tracy. How are you today?
I'm great, James. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you. Thank you for joining me. So before we kick things off, could you tell me a little bit more about yourself and your background in the security industry?
Sure, happy to. James, I am the Global Chief Security Officer here at Everbridge. And prior to this role, which I started in 2018, I was the Chief Security Officer at a financial services company in Washington, D.C. for several years. My security background actually starts when I joined the FBI in 1990. I retired from the FBI in 2012 as a deputy head of national security. So basically, I've had spent a lifetime in the security field in one aspect or another, and very happy to join you here today.
Yeah, I'm very pleased as well, Tracy. So let's just jump straight into it. Let's get started with the big picture. In today's security and business landscape, companies face a growing range of threats, from cyber attacks and data breaches to insider threats and physical security risks. With these challenges constantly evolving, why do you think it's more important than ever for companies to focus on operational resilience?
So it's an interesting concept. We can actually expand that list to include climate adaptation as well. All of these things actually adversely impact an organization's ability to service their customers and to maintain business operations. So the idea of operational resilience is to be able to return from a business disruption much faster than you could without it. So you want to make sure that operationally you are capable of understanding the scope of the disruption and what is required for you to return to business quicker. When you think about resilience, it's about recovering quickly from a disruption. So those companies that are resilient are much more sustainable in today's market than those that are not. And so because of that, it's really important that organizations are operationally resilient.
That's a really great point, Tracy. Companies can't afford to be reactive anymore. It's very crucial that they are prepared for any situation. But I would like to take a step back and clarify something with you quickly. When we talk about resilience, what exactly do we mean? Is it the same as being compliant with regulations, or is it something more?
It is something more. So compliance is generally a legal term that talks about being compliant with regulations as established by government entities. Resilience is the ability to recover quickly from any kind of disruption, whether it has anything to do with compliance or not. As an example, if you are a business in France that was impacted by the recent flooding, your ability to sustain your workforce and to return to revenue quickly is demonstrating your resilient capabilities in the face of a business disruption, and in this case, which was climate initiated. Very different than being compliant with, say, DORA, as an example. You have to be compliant, but compliance is not resilience. Resilience is all encompassing, as opposed to compliance, which is very narrowly focused on a rule, a regulation, or a law.
And you touched on it a little bit there, Tracy, but what's the business value of this resilience for companies?
Yeah, so the business value, when you look at the competitive landscape in today's entities, the thing that you need to remember is that if you are not resilient, if you can't satisfy customers, they will go somewhere else. If you cannot return to revenue faster, which is what resilience is all about, then somebody else will do that. So it will adversely impact your brand, your reputation, your customer base, and your ability to compete in today's market.
That's a really interesting distinction between compliance and resilience. Obviously, being compliant might keep you out of trouble with regulators, but being resilient is about ensuring long-term success, even when challenges arise.
Correct.
Obviously, nowadays, another challenge that businesses face is addressing both digital and physical threats. So, how did digital and physical resilience differ, and how can companies make sure they're covering both?
So that's an interesting concept. When you think about the separation between digital and physical, I am a firm believer that the two need to be combined. Because resilience actually is the ability of an organization to recover irrespective of what the disruption is. Now, there are different tactical issues that have to be addressed, whether it's a physical or a digital disruption. But at the end of the day, from a security perspective, our job in establishing an operationally resilient organization is to take all of those factors into consideration and look holistically at the landscape so that we can actually identify potential disruptions, put together mitigation strategies, and recover quickly. Now, physical and digital are very different, but they often overlap. I'll give you an example. If you are attacked through a data port in your facility, that person probably gained access by physical access to your facility and entered something into that data port. So there's an example of the combination of digital and physical. And if you separate them too much, it creates a gap. So in that gap is where vulnerability lives, because the physical doesn't think it's their responsibility and the digital doesn't think it's their responsibility. So collaboration and establishing an operationally resilient organization is really important to make sure that you don't leave air gaps that allow for disruptive activity to impact your business operations.
And Tracy, is there a way to integrate these two aspects into a single operational framework?
So there is, and it's something that is gaining traction across the industry today, and that is the combination of digital and physical. Traditionally, they have been separated, and that separation leads to mistrust between the two entities, which actually doesn't serve the best interest of the organization. So the idea is to break down the barriers between digital and physical. And one way to do that is to have a combined command center where your digital folks and your physical folks actually collaborate. By sitting next to each other, it actually dispels that distrust and misunderstanding between the two entities. It is really, really important that a single leader has responsibility for that. Traditionally, digital has come up on one side of the business and physical has come up on the other side. What we're seeing now with about 30% of organizations is that both the digital and the physical are reporting to the same executive. That in and of itself helps to break down those silos so that organizations can work more collaboratively to address potential disruptions.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially in a world where digital and physical risk are so interconnected. Speaking of industries that face interconnected risks, the financial sector has been particularly focused on operational resilience. We've seen new regulations like the UK's operational resilience policy and DORA in the EU, aimed at ensuring this sector can withstand disruptions. Why do you think the financial sector is at the forefront of this push for resilience?
So the financial sector traditionally, historically, has been very compliance and regulation driven. So it just makes natural sense. Also, the volatility in the financial markets make it imperative that these types of regulations exist because it impacts so much of the rest of industry. Financial institutions are the backbone on which most of our economies are built. So it stands to reason that most of them would be very compliance driven. Most financial services or financial institutions have regulators who they have to report to. So it's just a natural evolutionary step for countries and entities to really double down on compliance and to establish regulations that ensure the resilience of these financial institutions. It's a natural step in the progression when you think about it. It probably should have happened a while ago, but it's really reassuring to see that, regulations like DORA are actually gaining credibility and traction, because that's going to help us as organizations globally to become more operationally resilient.
I think it's fair to say that it's clear for financial institutions being resilient isn't just about business continuity, it's about protecting the entire economy. Now, I'd like to turn the focus to Everbridge specifically. Your company is doing a lot to help businesses become more resilient. Can you tell us more about how Everbridge supports companies in building and maintaining resilience?
So it's an interesting idea because operational resilience has a life cycle, right? So in order, and the thing that Everbridge does is it gives them the ability through actionable intelligence to identify potential risks and vulnerabilities actually before they manifest, which actually accelerates their ability to recover from those disruptions quicker. So if you look at it this way, if you are using an Everbridge platform and you have an intelligence feed that provides you with forewarning, if you will, of potential disruptions, and then during the course of those disruptions, because to be honest, you cannot avoid all disruptions, right? So it's not enough to be prepared. You also have to be able to respond. So one of the things that Everbridge does is to automate your response capabilities that accelerates your ability to respond to a potential disruption. So by automating that, as an example, one of the key capabilities in any disruption is making sure that your employees are notified. So by mass notification, you can actually use multimodal communications to inform your employees of potential disruptions, so that they can start to recover from those disruptions quickly. You can also use this system to actually do an after action after the response. So it categorizes and catalogs all of the responses of the teams so that you can identify areas that need improvement or those areas that perform really, really well. You can take that after action and then you can use that as a training tool for your organization to get better at your ability to recover from disruptions. So it's really a full life cycle. You want to identify, you want to respond to, you want to recover, and you want to learn from. The Everbridge platform allows organizations to do that in the fastest possible time.
It's great to hear that Everbridge offers such comprehensive solutions and training, especially in today's environment where the risks seem to be ever increasing. Just touching on them risks for a moment, what do you see as the key threats companies face today that could challenge their operational resilience?
So there's a couple of things. When we can talk about specific threats such as, climate adaptation, geopolitical instability, supply chain disruption, those are all issues that manifest. The biggest challenge that companies face is two things. One is complacency. By saying, we're fine, we don't need to do training, we don't need to practice, we don't need technology, we're fine. The other is denial. In other words, it will never happen to us. We're in an area that is not prone to traffic or weather disruptions, or we're in a geopolitically stable environment, or our supply chain is secure. Those are the types of things that lead to complacency, denial and complacency, which actually are the arch enemies of operational resilience. The other biggest challenge that you have is historically, resilience has meant business continuity. Business continuity is a part of resilience, but it's not resilience per se. Because of that, it hasn't gotten the attention of the C-suite and the board that other issues have. So developing an executive champion and getting C-suite buy-in is really important to establishing and maintaining a resilient organization.
And Tracy, could you tell the listeners a little bit more about what a black swan event is? And are you seeing an increasing amount of these compared to the past?
So Black Swan is an event that it's traditionally been associated with cyber, and it means it is a catastrophic failure of a system. But I would argue that, as opposed to black rhinos, white rhinos are black swan. White rhinos are really where you need to focus. Those are the minor disruptions that, left unaddressed, create an unsustainable environment for an organization. So while black swans are a big deal and they get a lot of attention, and they obviously they are catastrophic in nature, white rhinos are those smaller events that occur routinely that are not addressed. So by not addressing them, you're actually creating an opportunity. So it may be a minor inconvenience or a minor disruption to your business that doesn't raise to the level of an enterprise-wide response, but it also might be a test by an adverse actor to see how far they can penetrate. So by not paying attention to the minor disruptions, you're actually creating an environment that invites the black swan to occur. So operational resilience is a continuous process that has to be in place and has to be exercised regularly. Otherwise, you are not prepared to address those catastrophic events.
That's a great point. I think it's fascinating and maybe a little bit worrying as well that these minor events seem to be happening more frequently. It sounds like companies need to be ready for anything at any time. Now, you mentioned that Everbridge uses technology and data to help predict and mitigate these risks. Can you walk us through how you leverage data, AI, and other tools to stay ahead of potential threats?
Sure. So Everbridge has a fairly robust intelligence process. And in that process, we aggregate and deconflict intelligence. So information, they say that information is the new oil, right? Or data is the new oil. If that's true, then intelligence is the gasoline that is devised from that oil. So in order for that to work, you have to be able to collect massive amounts of data, and you need to be able to deconflict that data so that it becomes relevant to a customer. So what we do is we use AI to actually deconflict intelligence. We collect intelligence from over 25,000 disparate sources. If you think about a human analyst and a capability of the human mind, it is very quickly overwhelmed by that amount of information. So the idea is to use algorithms to identify key points that relate to the customer's needs for intelligence. The other thing that we're doing from an AI perspective is we're developing the capability to create intelligence reports purely from artificial intelligence without the human creating that document. What that does is it accelerates our production of intelligence, which elevates the ability to provide risk information to customers so that they can be better prepared. Now, that doesn't mean we're taking the human out of the loop, because the key component of that is keeping the human in the loop. So our intelligence analysts will serve as a quality control component. Because AI, while it is a phenomenal advancement in technology, it is not yet mature enough that we can trust it to provide reliable and actionable intelligence without having the final scrub by a human analyst. So it's the combination of humans and technology that creates curated intelligence that is actionable and timely for a customer. Too much intelligence is overwhelming. Not enough is just as bad. So it's finding that spot where it's relevant, timely, and actionable is where it matters. And that's why the combination of technology and humans is critical for the creation of curated intelligence so that organizations can be prepared for potential disruptions.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's impressive how far technology has come, especially in terms of AI. But I think you're 100% right in saying that it's that balance with humans as well that helps businesses to actually respond and predict threats. But what about the companies that don't have a large security operations center or a specialist team for physical and digital security? Can Everbridge still support those companies that may not have a lot of resources dedicated to resilience?
It's a great point, James. One of the challenges that we have in most companies are small, right? If we do the math across the globe. So what Everbridge has done is they've created a product called Everbridge Core, which is the same capabilities that we would provide to an enterprise-sized customer that is actionable without having a physical GSOC. It allows them to elevate their game to the point where they can be more competitive because they have the same capabilities as a large enterprise customer. This is a really great development for us because what we did is we realized that while an enterprise customer of, say, 100,000 employees probably has a GSOC and probably has the resources necessary to stand up a GSOC if they don't have one. But a company that's smaller is no less important to us than a company that is huge. So what we did is we sat down with our product marketing team and said, how do we actually provide these capabilities to organizations that don't have the resources or the bandwidth to create a GSOC? It doesn't mean that they should be susceptible to these things. So what we've done is this new Everbridge 360 Core is designed specifically for organizations that don't have GSOC. It actually elevates their capabilities without the financial burden of having to stand up a full-blown security operations center or a global security operations center. So it's a huge, huge advancement for us, and I'm really excited about it. I've been with small companies. I've been with large companies. Both of them are at risk, and they both need to have the capability to protect themselves, and that's the space in which we really think that we can add value.
It's great to know, Tracy, that even companies without large teams can still benefit from Everbridge's platform. I think that will resonate with a lot with our listeners. Now, on the other side to that, there are some well-known cases where a lack of resilience had devastating effects. Can you share an example of when an organisation faced significant consequences due to a failure in operational resilience?
So I will tell you two particular incidences. One of which was actually generated by a ransomware attack on an organization. This organization did not do the basic blocking and tackling associated with maintaining operational resilience. They didn't do patching. They didn't update their antivirus software, and the folks that had hands-on keyboards were not receiving the appropriate training. Because of that, they were actually hit with a ransomware attack that shut down their business. And it was a very large business. This could have been avoided with basic steps of resilience. But there again, the idea was when I talked to the CEO and the head of IT, they said, well, we just didn't think that we would be a target. That denial, right? That denial we talked about earlier actually led to a significant disruption in their business, and it cost them a significant amount of money to retool their network so that they could get back online and back to business. There are other examples that we can use both in the public and the private sector where either communities or organizations were not prepared for disruption. Oftentimes those things manifest in flooding, in fires, and natural disasters. These things are increasing exponentially over the course of time. I think we all know that. The frequency and the severity of these storms is increasing. So the denial that it will happen, that lack of resources dedicated to resilience actually creates immense vulnerability both for organizations and communities. So by not doing that, you end up losing significant amounts of either revenue or capabilities in communities. And so there are 1,000 different examples of where organizations have not been operationally resilient and it has cost them. You basically just need to pick up a newspaper or look online, and every day you see it. It is very, very prolific, which doesn't make sense to me because operational resilience is something that you can build over time. And you need to start now, not when something horrible happens.
Thank you for that, Tracy. There's some really powerful examples in there highlighting how critical it is to have a strong resilience plan in place. But let's talk about innovation for a moment. Businesses are constantly looking for new ways to innovate, but it's often a challenge to balance this while maintaining resiliency. What are some of the challenges organizations face when trying to achieve that balance?
So you've heard the term, right? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? And that's exactly how you build a resilient culture, is one step at a time. First, you have to identify where your weaknesses are. And you have to do it in a way that resonates with the core business. One of the biggest challenges with establishing operational resilience is that it is seen sometimes as a compliance issue and not as an operational issue. So if you are incapable of articulating to your C-suite the business value of being operationally resilient, it will not gain traction because they won't see that as important. But if you start to talk about revenue disruption, the quick return to revenue, brand and reputational impacts of not being operationally resilient, all of a sudden people start to listen. So one of the biggest challenges in establishing that is being able to tell the story in terms that resonates with key stakeholders. The second biggest challenge associated with establishing a resilient culture is to assume that it is responsibility of one entity in the organization, whether it's security, whether it's business continuity, whether it's chief risk officer. You need to open that aperture and understand that operational resilience is a horizontal integration of capabilities that allows businesses to return to revenue and to recover from disruptions faster. Everybody plays a part in that. That being able to articulate that and then putting together a robust plan is important. The third thing that is difficult is not understanding how technology can help. So Everbridge, for example, one of our key sayings is together we build a more resilient world. And what that means is that we can bring the technology capabilities that allow you to accelerate your resilience journey as you go down that path. So understanding where your challenges are, getting buy-in, and leveraging technology are probably the three biggest areas that impede organizations from being operationally resilient.
And innovation often plays a key role in opening up new opportunities. But what comes with that is also it creates new risks that companies need to manage. Looking ahead, what do you think is the future of operational resilience? And how do you see it evolving with emerging technologies?
So I think we have to be realistic in understanding that. I'll just use artificial intelligence as an example. Artificial intelligence is a great enhancement to an organization's capabilities to understand and mitigate risk. But it's also important to understand that that creates its own risk. The utilization of AI that is left unchecked can create vulnerabilities that you're unaware of. The other thing is that, and this sounds silly, but AI is creating AI that attacks AI, if that makes sense, right? So the responsible use of it and understanding the limitations are really important. I think that operational resilience in this instance is something that will become more and more important as the world becomes more and more competitive, as resources become scarce, as technology advances. It will morph to address the threats that we will face into the future. But in order to be prepared for that, an organization has to establish a baseline of operational resilience today and then build on it as new threats and vulnerabilities manifest into the future. So when you think about that, think about how do you aggregate deconflict intelligence, how do you leverage technology to accelerate your return, and how do you understand potential disruptions associated with technological advancement. Those are really, really important things as you start to develop and maintain a resilient culture.
So by the sounds of it sounds like operational resilience is going to be a key strategic focus for businesses, especially as new technologies and, as you said, global issues continue to reshape the landscape. Tracy, before we wrap this podcast up, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what the main differences are between Everbridge and its competitors in the operational resiliency space. What sets you apart?
So I think what sets us apart, number one, we're the leader in the world on this issue. Secondly, but we are an end-to-end solution. So when you think about organizational resilience or operational resilience, you have to think about it as a life cycle in a circle, right? So in order to do that, you have to plan. So what we did is we recently acquired a company called Infinite Blue, which is a business continuity planning company. So that planning stage is important. But then that doesn't work unless it can interface directly with your operational capabilities. So when you think about that, you have to plan for these events, right? A business continuity perspective. You have to be able to gather the intelligence that's relevant to what it is that you do. You have to be able to operationalize that intelligence through automated tool capabilities, which Everbridge provides. And you have to be able to accelerate that response capability. Everbridge is the only organization that creates that end-to-end solution for operational resilience, from the planning to the execution to the recovery to the after action and best practices capability. When you think about that, you want to be able to accelerate that journey by leveraging the tools that Everbridge brings to the table. In that respect, Everbridge is the only end-to-end solution out there that offers those capabilities. And to me, and that's exactly the reason I'm here. Having spent a lifetime in the FBI, that idea of giving back or having a mission that matters is important to me. And that's exactly why I'm at Everbridge, and that's why our employees are here today, because what we do matters.
It sounds like Everbridge is really setting a standard for resilience with a truly integrated approach. So thanks so much for joining me today, Tracy, and thanks for sharing your expertise on this critical topic.
Thanks, James. My pleasure.
And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to today's SJUK Leaders in Security podcast. I've been your host, James Humphreys. Make sure to keep an eye out for our next episode coming soon.